Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez.
Hello, welcome back. It's another exciting episode of Don't Fuck This Up. Today, we have a special guest who's made an indelible mark in the food, wine, and hospitality industry. With 2 decades of experience at both food and wine and travel and leisure, she was also on the ground floor at the very first season of Top Chef. Now, as a Chief Partnerships Officer at the curated food marketplace Goldbelly, it's none other than Chris Grdovic. Chris, welcome to Don't Fuck This Up.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm really, really happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And I feel like we had a little bit of back and forth on scheduling, which honestly just gave us, I think, both time to get really excited for this particular recording. So I just am so grateful that you're here with me today.
Yeah, I think I was telling you that thinking about being on your podcast was such a gift. Thinking about, going back and thinking about all the different jobs I've had, the cool ones, the not so cool ones, was a really, really nice journey for me.
Well, I mean, that's always such a great thing to be able to reflect. And I definitely want to be able to get into some, early days in your career and kind of what brought you to where you are today. I mean, I introed you with, where you are today, but let's talk about, early days. I'd be remiss not to mention you've worked with some of the best chefs in the entire world. In your days at Food and Wine, you were really kind of spreading your wings in terms of transforming the publishing space. So really, I'm curious to start with, what was your initial attraction? Have you always been interested in, I'll say, food and wine, as in the things that you intake, not the publication?
Right. I do not have that story of, I grew up cooking with my grandmother and all these amazing meals. Food was absolutely not part of my like everyone, I ate meals and I enjoyed food, but it just was not a big part of my life. I had a bunch of, sort of adjacent food jobs, through high school and college, which, now are sort of funny because I did learn a bunch of things. I didn't know it was ultimately going to be things I did. My first real job when I was in high school, I worked in a bakery, which was a really, really, really great experience. I also, I sold beer and ice cream at Shea Stadium, which is, what Citi Field was before it was Citi Field, which, was incredibly hard work, like hard physical work, but was also very, very rewarding, extremely fun. I managed a Haagen-Dazs in Grand Central Station, which is extremely random. And ultimately, what got me into food was I was working at an advertising agency at the time. It was called Kirschenbaum & Bond. It went on to be KB&P and then something else. And it was such a great agency, probably most well known for the work they did with Snapple. And I started there because I had been. This is a funny turn in my career. I had a very, very good friend that was working at Kirschenbaum & Bond, and at the time I had recently gone through a breakup, and they were doing this program called Generation VS. And it was for their Hennessy client. And they were taking people and sending them out to bars to make a scene and order Hennessy martinis, right? Which is kind of a weird drink because it's cognac and it's a martini.
Yeah.
And it was taking people who didn't know each other and sending them to these bars and making a scene to order the drink. And it was guerrilla marketing at its best. And so I did that for a while, and it was so wonderful that she gave me that opportunity because I needed something like fun and interesting to do. And then at the end of that project, the woman who was organizing it at the agency was leaving. And so I interviewed for the job. And I'll never forget, my friend Felicia's father was like, absolutely not. You cannot work together. It will never work. And I was like, okay. Mr.
Thanks for your support. Yeah.
You can just mind your own business. And luckily, she hired me. And we had so much fun and worked with such a great group of people, and ultimately took this Generation VS thing all over the country. We went to San Francisco, LA, Chicago, Miami. And the reason that got me into food is because at the time we were going to all of the best bars and restaurants, and bars in restaurants were becoming sort of a cool place to hang out, not unlike, everyone had been going to nightclubs, not that people didn't still go to nightclubs, but restaurant bars were becoming, this is the early 90s. And so people were starting to pay attention to chefs. It's before the Food Network. And so I did that for a few years, which was, I don't know if there's a better job for someone in their mid-20s where your job is literally to go out and find the best bars and restaurants, buy your friends drinks, and then hire people that you think are the best ambassadors for this. They were basically influencers before there were influencers.
That's amazing.
And then because I had all those experiences, I had, one of the things I did with a wine client that we were working with was, I went to the Food and Wine Classic in Aspen, and another friend of a friend who I had met, through the business then said they were looking for somebody to produce that event. And so I ultimately left, Kirschenbaum Bond to go to Food and Wine.
That's such an incredible trajectory because it is like an accidental, it's like you kind of fell into something really exciting that probably just, like you said, you went through a breakup, you were looking for a change of pace, you got into this, gig, and then you're like, wait, I think I could do this full time. I also, cut my teeth in the advertising space. I think it's a really, I kind of go back and forth. Like, I think the agency space is a really challenging environment to work in. I also think early career, there's almost nowhere better to get your experience because you're working across so many different projects, such a fast pace. And when folks come to me early in their career for coaching and they're asking, how do I get the experience? I want this big tech job. I'm like, you should go to an agency and just, 1 year there is equivalent to like probably 4 years at a client side company because you're just working across so much. What was one of the most memorable clients that you worked with? Was it that Food and Wine Festival in Aspen? Was it, what were you experiencing that you loved?
So when I was at Kirschenbaum Bond, I was first hired to work on specifically Hennessy, and we did those crazy drink programs. But then that led to other. At the time, it was called Shefflin and Somerset, which was the distribution company, and so we worked on the other LVMH brands, and we worked on Grand Marnier and Moet and Chandon, and that was such an incredible experience, not only for what you're talking about, because when you're at the agency, you get to see all the different client relationships. You see what everybody else is doing. You see what the media people are doing, the creative people, the account people. And it was an incredible education. But then I also got to learn about wine and cognac and cocktails. And, this is in the go-go 90s, right? So if you worked on Hennessy, you literally went to cognac and, in France. And like, those were such incredible opportunities and experiences. I also worked on Rioja, which is a wine region in Spain. Unfortunately, didn't get to go to Rioja, but again, got to learn a lot about wine, which I knew nothing about at the time. One of my one of my closest friends, he was taking his journalism career and moving it into specifically wine. And ultimately, that was also how I met my husband, because he and I were each other's plus ones everywhere we would go. And then I met my husband, who maybe not so coincidentally, is a publicist, mostly for restaurants and chefs, for lots of other things, travel clients and products. But at the time, it was very restaurant chef heavy. So all of a sudden, my professional life completely melded with my personal life, which I like. I like it that way.
And I think it's important, you bring up something that's, I think, more than any other time in my career, but I think for a lot of people, during the pandemic in recent years, we sort of didn't have a choice but to meld our professional and personal lives. We were opening our laptops and starting our work days at our homes and closing our laptops and maybe getting a smooch during lunch. You just, that would be the best case scenario. That was my scenario. But I think that it's also interesting because it's important to have those boundaries. It's important to kind of have those perimeters. So what were some of the things that you did for yourself, and maybe even as advice to a listener who does have a job that really coincides with their personal life? Like, how do you recharge the batteries? How do you give yourself kind of off the clock time, so to speak?
So I don't know if I do or if I did, because I liked it so much. I think if you if you're working in a field that isn't also sort of your hobby, right? Which,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, food isn't, food is a hobby. But like I loved learning more about food and learning how to cook and learning more about wine. And those were all things that were part of my personal life because I also love entertaining. My husband's a really, really, really talented cook. So we're always having people over everywhere we go, small parties, large parties. And so I don't know if I ever really felt like I needed to take a step back from that because I feel like anything I was doing, if I was like reading things or watching things or, or going to talks, if they were about food or wine, that was enriching both parts of my life.
Prior guest, Bill Conway, who, started the Hard Times, which is a large online, editorial platform. He said, if you do what you love, you really do
Right.
never work a day in your life. And he's like, I know it's been said a lot of times, but it always stuck with me because it's true. It's like, if you can create that, space and it's the thing that you love, then it doesn't feel as strenuous like you're working. It doesn't feel as arduous like you're actually like investing in enriching your own experiences. And so I think that's great. I mean, and maybe the word of encouragement or advice here is just like try to put yourself into an environment where you're in an industry that you actually care about. And I think that to me is like, I've worked for companies and clients that I'm just like, yeah, I don't know, like it's, money is green or something. And like, it's just never as fulfilling to me. It's always going to be the best case scenario is that like, I really fuck with what we're doing.
Right. I am. Yeah. I mean, and not to suggest like, I certainly, I definitely believe in balance, right? I love to work out. I love a long walk. I love to travel. I love vacations. But like even travel is a great example of, you're on vacation. It's 100% a vacation, right? You've actually like, you have your out of office message. You're not taking any meetings. But when I'm on vacation, I still, it's all about the restaurants. It's all about the food. It's all about the market. Recently we went to Barcelona and I had to, make sure that I went to every single food market. And it doesn't necessarily mean like going to the best restaurants or the Michelin starred restaurants. It just means finding really, really interesting things that are delicious. And I almost never have a meal that isn't purposeful in some way, shape, or form. So my point being, even though that's vacation, it's still giving me more like research for work.
Yeah. Is it a tax write-off? Yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know. Diane, what?
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's amazing too, because you also spoke to something that I think really resonates. I mean, my dad was a chef, by no means like the fanciest of chefs, but I think I grew up eating and experiencing food differently than a lot of people because it was like, his guidance was always like, just try it. And if you don't like it, just politely spit it in your napkin and try to feed it to the dog, and it's like, I think that that's a great approach to have when you're out experiencing new things. And even, if it's not food, it could be an experience. You could say, yeah, not my favorite, moving on. But I think that also, kind of taking away the eliteness around food, I mean, you've worked with some of the top restaurants and chefs in the world, and also taking away, that thing that feels stuck up or that thing that feels unattainable. I mean, wine, I think, is something that you've seen more in recent years, have fried chicken and a glass of champagne because it's more fun, right? Or natural wine and really making it playful instead of such a serious, what is the minerality and, where are we coming from? And I think that there is something really refreshing about that space that feels less stodgy and much more approachable. So I know you had a really big hand in, especially during your time at Food and Wine and then at Travel and Leisure, but really thinking about this, what were some of the kind of initial strategies that you thought, okay, I'm having fun. How do we make this more fun like what I'm having?
Yeah, it's funny. Like exactly what you just described is what this woman who hired me, who's another really good friend of mine, my friend Pam Norwood, when she hired me at Food and Wine, her mission was to go in. She went in and she was like, wait a second. They're playing classical music and they're wearing double-breasted blazers.
Yeah.
Like, why are they making food? And the people that were there loved food and they had so much expertise. but it wasn't fun. And so the mission was, okay, how do we make this more accessible? Because obviously if we make it more accessible, then we can have a bigger audience. If we have a bigger audience, we sell more advertising, right? Which is ultimately the goal
That's the
at the end
goal.
of the day. But how fun is it that the way you're going to get there is by making it more fun? And so that was more parties and loosening everything up, and exactly what you're describing, if it's champagne and fried chicken, or I remember we hired Questlove long before he was Questlove to DJ a party, which people weren't doing those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it was a lot about making it more accessible and more fun.
I love that. I mean, I feel like it's a good moment to ask, who do you have a favorite restaurant that you feel like does that really right? Because I do think also people are curious, and then there's the intimidation. I think Instagram's done a good job of breaking down barriers, showing us what goes on. We have shows like The Bear that shows us what actually happens in those high-end kitchens. But what restaurant, or, maybe even a pop-up, are you thinking when I mentioned that, make it fun, make it approachable, what stands out to you?
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard for me to pick out individual restaurants, because I don't get to be a regular as much as I would like, because I'm always trying to try what's new, what's next, what's happening. But for me personally, I prefer a more casual environment. I'm, of course, I've enjoyed so many amazing tasting menus and fancy restaurants, but my preference is more in New York City, a Via Carota is my perfect setting, right? I love Via Carota. I'm trying to think, if I think about the last few meals I had, there's a new restaurant near my apartment in Brooklyn called Gertrude's, which is just fantastic. It's a small menu. Everything's good. The drinks are good. The wine, it's a small wine list. And that's what I like. It's sort of I like a boutique better than a department store.
1,000%.
And I mean, my other favorite, I also ate there this week, is Chouquette, which is
so good.
Middle Eastern. And, you get, it's so delicious, but it's so casual, and you're just sharing everything, and things keep coming and going. And that's sort of the vibe that I like very much.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I've definitely had exposure to the pomp and circumstance, and you feel like you're on your best behavior, and which order do I use my utensils in and everything. And there is a really fun experience that comes with that, because it's wow. I mean, I certainly didn't grow up with that type of exposure. And so when I first got to experience those things, it was really exciting to me. But I so much more respect the fun, the energy, the kind of vibrancy that comes with let's make this family style. Let's all pick off each other's plates. Ooh, I want a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And, oh, we'll order the menu. That's the best. You have a 4-top and you've got some good friends with some good adventurous spirit, and you just say, yeah, we'll have everything with the small menu, exactly. However you want to course it out. I mean, so thinking about when you were, moving into the space of also being in leadership, I want to talk about your time, at Food and Wine, moving into overseeing teams, overseeing people and growing them in their career. Because you, as you said, sort of happy accident in the best way possible, created this amazing trajectory for yourself. How did you leverage your own experiences to bring people up, that were how'd you do it, Chris? I want to be like you. And you're well,
yeah.
How do you do that?
So when I started at Food and Wine, my initial job was to be the event marketing manager at on the Food and Wine Classic in Aspen. So my job was to produce this one event, which was obviously a huge event, but I wasn't working on all these other marketing initiatives, or there was a team of salespeople, and the way it had been structured was everyone was very siloed. And so when we got there, again, my friend Pam, we got there, we were why? Why are you doing it this way? Everybody should be working together. And again, it'll be more fun for everybody. It'll be more efficient. And so we started doing that. And I'll never forget, at the time, our CEO, I got hired for this job, and our CEO said to me, it's a 3-year job. People can only do it for 3 years. They get burned out. And I remember thinking, why? Like, why? And at the time, I hadn't had a job for more than 3 years, so that seemed fine. But I was like, what are they burned out about? Aspen, the chefs, the wines? Like, I'm not following what part of this they get burned out by.
Yeah.
And so obviously, I stayed for 20 years, so I didn't get burned out after the 3 years. It also happened to be like a moment in time that chefs were becoming, not that there hadn't been celebrity chefs before that, but they were on TV more. There were more, they were just part of the zeitgeist. So that made it really fun. And I think ultimately what happened was, hold on, the question was, collaboration is the answer to the question, right? Collaboration and everybody just like sharing all their information and everyone on the team making everyone else better. And, I think, some people don't necessarily agree with this, but I do think you have to hire people that you like. They don't need to be your friends. You don't need to hang out with them on the weekends, but you spend a lot of time together. And especially the way we were working at the time, we were all in the office. I know that doesn't really happen anymore, but we were in the office for very, very long hours. And then we were traveling a lot. And we would go to these food and wine festivals and we'd be away for like entire weekends together. And so, if you're going to be stuck in an airport with somebody for 9 hours, it's going to be a lot better if you don't dislike them.
100%. And I think you said something when we were talking about like, some of the things you wanted to chat about in our, conversation today. You mentioned something, you said like happy people are more effective, I think was exactly what you said. And it was so, it's so simplified, but it's so true. I think when you feel happy and I also can relate. I mean, I remember, yes, when we used to go in the office 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week, and we were grinding and we were working till late and we'd all order dinner. But there is like a certain joy of like, we're all like one team, one goal kind of mentality. And, I think it does kind of put you in the position when you're a leader to really kind of be like the team coach as well and really help people to see highlighting their strong suits, putting them with other people that can help them, get better in the areas of improvement. So it's like you are kind of looking at everyone and you are coaching them, you are participating, you're super hands-on in those environments, right? You're not just like sitting at a desk and telling everyone what to do.
Yeah, I think what you said about like putting people in the right spot and then having other people help them is really so important. And it was oftentimes like moving people around on different projects, and sometimes identifying, if there was, I was going to say a weak link, but it's less about a weak link and maybe the person, like the troublemaker. Right? Like who's the troublemaker? And like, let's either move the troublemaker somewhere else or figure out what the problem is and solve that problem, because then it's better for everybody. Right.
Yeah.
And when I think back, obviously I'm not going to name any names, but like I think about a couple of different people who, sometimes, were, and I was going to say the squeaky wheel, but I think that because I'm definitely a squeaky wheel and I think it's okay to be a squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
The troublemaker is not so good. So I'm trying to think of how to explain it, but if you saw somebody that was like making somebody else unhappy, like as the leader, as the manager, it is your job to get in there and figure out a way to make everybody work well together. Because if they're not, then the work's not getting done. And
totally.
So yeah, I think coaching, it's very much like, not that I've ever coached a sports team, but
you could.
It feels very much like, right, that's how teams work, right? Because it's all about, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's about the teamwork, right? It's not about the individual,
1,000%.
It's about the team. So I think the other word I used was it's an ensemble, right?
Yes.
Which I think
totally.
If you have a good team, that's what it should be. It should be an ensemble. There shouldn't be the one person who's always like either coming up with all the ideas or getting all the credit or is sort of the most forward facing. Ideally, it should be like, the cast of Friends and everybody's famous.
I mean, it's so interesting, you say that. And as you were talking, it made me think about, I had this really amazing team. Probably one of my prouder career moments was during my time at Airbnb, we went through like massive changes. I mean, we did a big layoff when everyone stopped traveling early in the pandemic. That was pretty chilling, right? And like from a talent, HR, recruiting standpoint, 80% of my team went away overnight. And it's like, I
Oof.
inherited this new team. Everyone gets on the Zoom call. Everyone looks like a, rescue puppy. They're like, what the fuck do we do? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. And that's vulnerability as a leader, right? But what ended up happening with that team is like we rebuilt, and that team of 6 people became a team of like 22 people at its biggest, and it was like the thing I was most proud of was that it wasn't about me as the leader. Like, yes, I was always available to like block and tackle. Like, I dare someone to try to come for my team. Like, I will completely,
Yep.
roll you, but also allowing them to do their best work and just trusting in them and saying like, it's not up to me. Like, you tell me what you're best at. But then having a lean enough team. And I think this is an issue I see with a lot of people that I work with now that have overhired, and they're at a point where they're like, hey, we have so many people. And I'm like, yeah, but nobody feels empowered to like really push the work, right? Because they're all like thinking there's other people who are going to do it. So having a lean enough team where there's accountability and they all trust each other. And so you can't be a weak link because everyone can see that. They see that it stands out. They see like this person isn't pulling their weight. And the way that this team was, and what made me so proud, is that they all held each other accountable. So it wasn't about me. I could be out for a week on vacation and come back and things were better than I left them. It's because they truly cared, and no one was going to let that work fall. And I think that's the thing that like when you're building massive events, when you're growing a team, when you're scouting new talent, to join your organization or your team specifically, it's like you have to figure out like who's going to come in and push, and also be, open to being like that peership is something we talk about on the show a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of words that you said that I think are really, really key, right? The first one is trust, which I don't know, that might be the most important of everything, because if people don't trust each other on so many different levels, the whole thing falls apart, right?
Yes.
Like even the most basic thing, I remember we used to talk a lot about assume the best, right? Because this is sort of dating myself, but like when Blackberries came out, right? And all of a sudden people were emailing from home and people got cell phones and they were taking calls from different places. And maybe everybody wasn't physically in the office at the same time. And obviously everybody was always traveling and in different places, but we reminded each other to assume the best, which meant like, just assume that everyone else is working as hard as you are or as smart as you are. And don't like get caught up in this person took this day off and this person was over there. Right. And that's part of the trust, but the trust goes so much deeper. And then I think it's attached to the other word you used, which is care. Right. Mm-hmm. And so do the people, do they care about each other? Do they care about the work? Are they proud? Right. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of from my Food and Wine days and the teams are how many of the people have left and gone on to work with each other and hired each other for different things, right? Like there's one,
I love that.
Our old creative director has his own creative studio now, and lots of other people have hired him to work where they are. There's another guy who was our digital director who started his own entire digital sales company, and I don't even know how many people are there now. There's probably 7. There's another woman somewhere else who's hired a couple of people, and I love all these subgroups.
Yeah.
And none of that would have happened without the caring and without the trust.
Well, I think that's so interesting too, and that during that time you had the opportunity to also grow your own career. I mean, we'll talk about kind of branching out on your own and going into the consulting space, but I mean, you had some pretty big milestones during that time. I mean, I would be remiss not to make you talk about your time on reality TV on Top Chef. So we're going to talk about it. What was that like? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's such a great story, especially because, here it is 20 years later and it's still on the air and it's still winning awards, and they're still evolving and innovating. What happened was, I can never remember what year it was, but I guess it's like, I don't know, 2006 maybe. And we're getting tons of proposals for all these different reality style things, because you have to remember at the time, like Survivor's on the air and
right.
like maybe a season of Project Runway, but like there's no real reality TV, and nobody thinks it's going to last, right? Everyone thinks
Totally.
It's a trend and it's just here for however long it's going to be here. And so we had gotten all these proposals. They weren't great. And then one day we got introduced, again, a mutual friend of a friend introduced me to somebody at Bravo, and we had a meeting. And every time they would say something, we would be like, oh my God, like, they'd be like, we're about talent scouting. And we were like, we're about talent scout. We're about discovery. And so we had all these shared, like values and it just felt really, really good. But I will say, when they first called and said, we're going to do this TV show and we're going to vote a chef off every week, we all sort of rolled our eyes and was like, that sounds silly. But we looked at the proposal, we had a zillion meetings, and then we agreed that we would do it. And, I can say this now, but honestly, I thought, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? If it doesn't work, it goes away. No one's going to remember it, right? No one's going to be like, oh, Food and Wine, they did that silly TV show. And so, part of the deal was the winner gets featured in Food and Wine magazine. They get to come to the Food and Wine magazine Classic in Aspen. And then the other thing was we have the opportunity to put a judge on the show. And at the time, our editor in chief had young children. She couldn't go live in San Francisco for a month. And so they said, send as many people as you can for the screen test, because the more people you send, the more likely we'll find somebody. So we sent a bunch of editors. And then the night before, we were like, let's send Gail. Gail Simmons had gone to cooking school, was in the marketing department, which is not typically the people that get to go on TV, right?
Yeah.
But she had worked for Daniel Boulud. She had worked at Vogue for Jeffree Steingarten. So she had a lot of culinary chops. And we sent her, and they loved her, and they picked her. And so Gail became a judge. She and I flew to film the pilot. I mean, I didn't film, right? She was filming the pilot. I did the deal. And when we got there, they gave us like a clipboard that had all the chef, I don't know if they called them chef testants at the time, but like the bios of the chefs that were going to be competing. And Gail and I are looking through it, and we're like, we don't know any of these people. Like, is this going to work?
Yeah.
And a lot of the reason we did it, I mean, we trusted Bravo. Tom Clicchio was involved. And so the chef, Tom Clicchio, we were like, okay, Tom is smart. Tom's not going to do something that's not right.
Yeah.
But it all worked out, and it was great. And I mean, a big part of the reason we did it at Food and Wine was because you're always trying to attract a younger audience, attract a different audience, again, to make the audience bigger so you can sell more advertising. And so that was a wild success for us in so many ways.
It's incredible too. I mean, just to have that exposure and to be able to be on the ground floor of something. I worked with a hospitality collective when I was living in Boston. And one of the chefs from our restaurant group actually went on to win, I think it was like season 10, Kristen Kish. I mean, she's like a big fucking deal now.
She's the host now.
I know. Yeah. So she won, and then now she's the host.
She's also the best. She's
absolute, so great.
She's the absolute best. She's smart. She's beautiful. She actually, she said this thing. I don't want to paraphrase it because I don't think I'll do a good job, but she was on a panel that I went to last year, and she was just like incredibly articulate. I adore her.
She's incredibly thoughtful. She's a great mentor. It was like always impressive to see her, because she's one of those people who like moves in silence and kind of like stealth mode. And then you're just like, wait, oh my God, you just did all of that. But she was always taking the younger, kind of up and comers under her wing. And that was like something that I got to observe. And then you see someone go on TV and you're like, oh no, like she seems cool, but I know she's actually cool. And that was always like really interesting to me just to see that.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, going in, we were skeptical in the beginning. We weren't sure. Obviously there were, again, we thought reality TV was not a real thing.
Yeah.
But Bravo did an amazing job. The producers, the Magical Elves, are just really, really good. They cast incredible chefs, and so much talent has come out of that show.
Yes.
And they've done a really, really good job. So it's one of my favorite things.
I love that. I mean, and the other thing I was curious about is you mentioned Chef's Club, and that was something that you were collaborating with the St. Regis in Aspen. And this was something that kind of extended the Food and Wine Classic beyond kind of the confines of that one event, right? This was a year-long, event that you kind of curated.
Yeah, it was great. What happened was, so the Food and Wine Classic is not obviously, but it is in Aspen.
Yes.
And having, hosted it for so many years there, we had very, very good relationships with all the hotels, the town, et cetera. And so the people who were managing the St. Regis at the time came to us and said, they had some celebrity chef restaurants in the hotel, but they wanted to do something different. They wanted to show people that they could do something interesting. And so we actually sat down and we brainstormed. It started out as a Top Chef idea, but the Top Chef idea didn't actually work as well for the hotel. And then we came up with this idea of, Chef's Club ultimately, naming something is one of the hardest things you will ever do. So at the time it didn't have a name, but we came up with this idea that we would have rotating guest chefs. And like, how great is that a restaurant can basically reinvent itself, however, if it was once a quarter, twice a year. And as a guest, you would be able to like experience all these different things. We did it in Aspen. It was great. And then we opened a second one in New York City with the intention, the owner of the St. Regis wanted this to become global, and we were going to open them all over the place. The one in New York was pretty successful for a while, and then they decided to go in a different direction and not open more. And now the old Chef's Club is Teresi, which it was a beautiful restaurant when it was Chef's Club, and now Teresi has made it. I don't even know if they've made it more beautiful. It's just a beautiful restaurant. So,
I love that.
Yeah. When I first went into Teresi, I thought, am I going to be sad? Am I going to miss Chef's Club? But, Teresi, it was so great that I sort of, I was able to do both things. I was able to miss it, but then also love the new restaurant.
Well, I really love that. I mean, so I want to talk about moving into consulting and that space. But one thing that you said that really stuck with me is your friend wrote a book called Your Network is Your Net Worth. And the reason I'm bringing it up now is because one, I think that's a fucking great title. And really two, it really is like such a great.
Porter Gale. It's a call out to my friend Porter Gale. She's like the most amazing, like reinvents herself, always is a star. And I actually had her come and speak at one of our sales meetings when that book came out.
Which is, so powerful. And, I think the obvious question would be, oh my gosh, you had so much success, in the publishing space. Why would you ever go out on your own? But as someone who's done exactly that, I also know that there's something really special. But I think more importantly is that theme of your network and your net worth and how that can build your confidence. So when did you know it was time to go out on your own?
It was time for me because publishing was changing so much.
Yeah.
And initially Food and Wine and Travel and Leisure and Departures were owned by American Express. And then American Express was no longer allowed to run a publishing company. So they had to sell it. They sold it to Time Inc., which at the time we were managed by Time Inc. So we knew all the players and, it seemed like such a natural transition. But the whole advertising game was changing and it was becoming more about, what Google and Facebook were doing. So it was a little bit less about the brand and more about the numbers.
Yeah.
And I had so much success and it had been such a dream job that, it felt okay to take a step away. And so I didn't totally know what I was going to do. But what was so wonderful was that clients called, like my ex-clients, called and said, what are you doing now? And, one was, he had been the president of Belvedere and we had done an enormous amount of work with Belvedere. But he was now the new, U.S. president of Fever Tree, and Fever Tree was launching. They had been in the U.S., but they needed to make a big splash and have better distribution. And so he called and was like, "Hey, will you help us with this?" And so that was really exciting and really fun. And even now, now I've been gone for I think 7.5 years. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was connecting with Kerry Gold, was one of our biggest advertisers at Food and Wine, and I connected with the old Kerry Gold client. And I have to say, like, I'm still connected with a lot of those people, and some of those relationships are like I value those more than anything. So it was so yes, your your net worth can be your network, not for everybody, right? But I guess, definitely never want to burn a bridge. And you want to keep those relationships alive, which I think, one of the things, I can't remember when I sort of identified this, but I think sometimes when you have a full-time job, not consulting, right? You have consulting is a full-time job, but like one company, you're so focused on that job that you're only talking to people that can help you move forward in that role. And when I left, I sort of remembered, you got to keep in touch with everybody, right? Like you have to have those like random coffees and phone calls and emails, because you just never know. And so that has been really, really, really important for me over the last, since I left Food and Wine. Cause I think when I was at Food and Wine, I was like head down, and I was only like, basically was like only talking to people that were related to that part of my life. And so that's one little piece of advice I would give people, which is,
I love that. Yeah. I mean, just keeping those connections alive. And, nothing is more transactional to me. And it's off-putting when someone just reaches out to me if they need a reference, or someone's just reaching out to me if they need advice or they need career coaching or something, versus someone who just like wants to keep the connection alive. And then I'm 10 times more likely to want to help you, hype you, remember your name when I'm in a room and someone's saying, I really need somebody who does this. Like there was a rolling list of people in my brain at all times of like looking for an opportunity. They'd be great for this. And people ask me all the time, do you know somebody who does this? And sometimes I'm just like, no, there's no skin in the game for me, except for I just want to help this person. But it's like the people who stay top of mind are not necessarily the ones who have worked closest with me. They're the ones who stay in touch just because they genuinely liked working together. And that to me always goes so much further. And I try to reciprocate the same of like, to your point, it's not just about the people who can help me or, serve me or whatever you want to put it. It's also who, you never know, like who knows who and what connections they have and how it might lead to something in the future.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with all of that. And what I would add to it is, I can't remember who I was having this conversation with recently. Like I'm happy to, I feel like I do a lot of favors. I ask a lot of favors. I feel like I'm happy to do that all the time. Right. Cause that's how you get things done. What I don't love is the people who reach out and don't tell you why they're reaching out. And I find myself in this situation more and more often where I literally am like, are they reaching out to me because they think there are job opportunities at Wonder, or are they reaching out to me because they think I can introduce them to somebody, or are they just reaching out, to your point, because they're trying to stay in touch? And all of those things are fine, right?
But just be upfront.
Exactly. I'm like, just tell me what we're
in the first line.
Correct.
In the first line, like I nothing's worse. I totally, oh my gosh, like you just sent something through my body. It's like when I get the text, it's like, hi, how are you? And I'm like, is this a trap? It's like, I don't know. And it's also like with text and email, like we're so accessible to each other. It's like, I might be like in the middle of a bunch of things. And if someone texts me, hi, how are you? I don't really want to think more about it than like exactly what you're asking of me. You don't actually care how I'm doing. You need something from me. So just ask me for it.
And somebody just did it the other day. This woman that I worked with so many years ago, and I probably haven't talked to her in like 3 years. And she reached out and said, I've been thinking about you. I'd love to get together. And I want to let you know, I'm back in the job search and this is what I'm looking for. And I was like, yes, 100%.
Love that. That's exactly how to do it.
Exactly.
That's perfect. And you're so right though. And it's like, I mean, I encounter this a lot as a coach. People are like, asking me a question. It's just like, hey, do you know anybody who works here? And it's like, are you asking what the vibe of the company is? Are you asking it for an intro? Right. But it's like, and then it's like, are you asking for me to do work for free? Because I'm also pretty sensitive to that. Like I'll always like throw down for people and make an intro, but it's like at some point you have to also remember this is what I do for my living. This is actually what I do. And so I think it's also a reminder that like respecting kind of the parameters of the person you're reaching out to, acknowledging their professional, that this is their professional pursuit, and then asking for the favor, man, that's going to get you so much further.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, talk to me about like where because I mean, going from being client side to having your own thing, when do you feel like you've had the most growth in your life and what really caused that for you? Like, when have you grown? Was it those moments where you were in your early days working in the team, or was it when you went out on your own and you were sort of like in the wilderness, somewhere in between, maybe?
So when I went out on my own, I didn't know if it was forever, if it was for a finite period of time.
Yeah.
Was I going to like hire people and turn it into a business? And I did it for, I guess, about, I don't know, 2 years. And it was great. I loved all the clients I worked with. Things continued to, find their way to me, which was great.
Yeah.
I didn't get to that place where you're like looking over your shoulder, wondering where your next client's coming from.
Yeah.
And I started my role at Wonder as a consultant, right? So I had gotten introduced to them. It was long before the launch. It was a stealth business. And they wanted somebody to help identify, the most popular cuisines, the best restaurants, the best chefs, and then make the introductions and then ultimately negotiate the contracts. And so I did that for 6 months. And, at the time I had a handful of clients and everything was great. And at the end of the 6 months, they asked me to come on full time. And so that was a pivotal moment, right? Because I was like, okay, I'm definitely much more of a like corporate one job, not consulting type. But I was enjoying it. So I was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? And the reason I took it was a couple of things. One, all the chefs that I had recruited to come to Wonder, loved the idea. Everyone was really enthusiastic about it. And I thought, okay, well, if these chefs who are all smart and successful think it's a good idea, then I think it's a good idea too. And the people I was working with at the time, I mean, some of them are still there, some of them are not, were really, really smart and also really outside of my circle. Because I had spent so many years, in advertising, in publishing, in food, that I had this circle of people that everybody was 2 degrees, everybody knew everybody. If you didn't know them, you knew somebody who knew them. And so these people were completely different people. And I loved that. I loved that I was jumping into an entirely new world. They worked differently. And so so that's why I took it. And then, the timing could not have been better because for me personally, because it was, right before the pandemic hit. And I think, had I been consulting during the pandemic, obviously it would have been a very, very different, thing. And then it was also pretty exciting to be able to launch a business during the pandemic, which is what we did.
Yeah. And I mean, let's talk a little bit about Wonder too, because I think that Wonder is such an interesting concept around having like, everything is like health tech, fintech, but food tech. And like, what does that actually mean in the food tech space, but having a startup, as it pertains to food? I mean, we've seen things like Cloud Kitchen, stuff like that kind of bubble up and maybe bubble down. But I'd love to hear, what was attractive to you about this? I mean, you spoke about the chefs being passionate about it. It's a discerning group of people that were like, this is a really good idea. What are you seeing now that we're like, I'll say like we've moved through the pandemic, we're on that kind of the other side of it. What have been some of like the exciting points about working at a company like this?
So I would say it is definitely a food company, but it is also very, very much a tech company. I often describe it as food tech. And that is exciting. And it's exciting to be there because I do believe that we are making major innovations and major changes, right? The business started out as we were delivering food to people's homes in these mobile kitchens that were, outfitted with, there were trucks that had outfitted kitchens inside of them. And we started in New Jersey and we were going to neighborhoods where, maybe there were a few restaurants, but there wasn't a huge amount of assortment and there wasn't like what you can have in New York City. And so we wanted to bring people, more food, better food, faster, hotter, all of that, which we did. And it was great. Turns out the trucks, you couldn't really deliver as many meals as you wanted to because people really want to eat in a very 65 minutes.
Yeah.
And so because we had done so much work on the R&D, the research and development of how to optimize food for delivery, we were able to pivot and go from the trucks to the to brick and mortars. And so now there are these brick and mortar stores in New York City, in New Jersey. I think there's 12 now. There'll be 35 by the end of the year, 90 by the end of next year. They're going to be
no
everywhere.
big deal.
And so the tech is very, very exciting. But for me, the most exciting part is the food is really, really good. Obviously, I couldn't do what I do if I didn't believe that the food was great, right? I can't go to chefs and try to convince them to come on this platform if the food isn't great. And so there are two wonders. Actually, I live between two of the wonders. And I, like, even though I get to eat the food at work all the time, I often will order it for myself or go pick it up because it's that good. And the team of chefs that we have, not only the chefs that we work with, the Jose Andres, Marcus Samuelson, Michael Simons, the chefs that work at Wonder are incredible. Like, they're very, very talented, really smart, and come from all different places, right? Four-star restaurants, hotels, catering companies, but they're really, really, really good. So for me, that's the biggest part.
That's amazing too. And I think
I should say, not the biggest part.
Well, I mean, it's what's the biggest part to you? What's the biggest draw for you, right? And I think, the other thing I think about is like the accessibility of good food is, it's so neighborhood to neighborhood even sometimes. I mean, I remember when I first moved to New York, I lived pretty deep into Bed-Stuy, like off the Utica stop, and there was Saragina. That was amazing, walkable. I used to keep an envelope of cash actually because they were cash only when I first moved in. I had an envelope of cash at my apartment that I would have just for pizza cash. But it was like, that was the big restaurant, but there was still not a lot of access to like great food. And then we think about affordability, in the US, of like that good food feels like a privilege. And I think that we've got a ways to go, but then, I mean, as someone who, you've also traveled to Europe, you've spent time, understanding that there is, different levels of quality that you can experience,
right,
around the world. What are some of the things that you feel like, stand out to you when you think about like food and access here in the United States?
Things that stand out. I mean, I think the access we have is like sort of unbelievable, right? Living in New York, living in Brooklyn, I feel like I can get whatever I want, whenever I want.
I do miss that.
Yeah. And for me, when we said, okay, we're going to start opening these stores in New York City, there was a little part of me that was concerned, because I thought, well, we already have everything. Like, why? We don't need anything else.
Right.
But, I think, not just New Yorkers, but New Yorkers for sure always want, what's new.
Yes.
And so at Wonder, we're always introducing new restaurants, new dishes. And even though I have a zillion restaurants in my little tiny neighborhood, there are certain things that I want from Wonder because I think we do it better than anybody else. Like, I have a couple of go-to salads, a couple of go-to sandwiches. There's a salad on the Jose Andres menu that, sometimes I can make it myself, but other times I just want to get it delivered and have a plate of jamon with it. And, so I think the answer to your question is, the answer is actually, sorry, I know what the answer is. It's not just assortment. It's so many different global cuisines now, right?
Yeah.
Where it used to be sort of obviously it will always be the obvious ones, the pizza, burgers, Italian, Mexican. But now there's so much great, Thai, Vietnamese, Korean. And I think we're just going to go further and further, like, Filipino is really, really popular. And I think that's great for everybody, because I think it educates people, it teaches them, plus it gives you more access to not only great food, but like learning about other cultures.
Absolutely. It's been one thing that I really love. I mean, living in LA, we have such a good food scene here. And I was really stressed about like not having what we had in New York. I mean, 3 a.m. Ethiopian craving hits and boom, it's there in 20 minutes. But I think one thing about LA is that you really do see a lot of the like Latin culture influence for sure. The Mexican food is just better here. I mean, there's I won't even have that argument. But I do think that there's also something to be said about, the Asian influence and just the culture. Filipino food has has been popping here for a long time, and I think that that's actually like a really cool thing to see. But there's so much pride in kind of neighborhood to neighborhood, which I do think parallels with New York, like LA and New York will always talk about like why we're so different from each other. But as a like longtime New Yorker who is now in LA, I'm like, this is very much the vibe is like you're within your neighborhood, you really believe in the places, but will you travel outside of it to get the best thing? Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. I think this one restaurateur who just opened a restaurant in Brooklyn, Gabe Stuhlman, was saying like he wanted to open a Brooklyn restaurant that people from Manhattan would go to and not say like they're going to Brooklyn. Right. I mean, I think there's tons of great restaurants in Brooklyn, but I understand that behavior that people feel like, I don't know if they feel like it's a trek. Right. But
yeah. I mean, I was a really naughty New Yorker. I had a car, so I was going everywhere. I was the worst. I was like, go jump in the car in Brooklyn, drive up to the Upper East Side because I need a certain pastry, and then I'll head home. And yeah,
I love that. I love
that.
I
mean, food tourism within your own city. I mean, talk to me about like what are some of your favorite brands right now? Who's doing business right? Who are you excited about? Like I know Wonder is doing some really cool stuff, but outside of that, it doesn't have to be in the food or wine world. But what stands out to you?
God, that's a really, really good question. I know, hold on, I have to think about this for a second. You mentioned that you were at Airbnb, and I think what Airbnb is doing right now, with their experiences is really, really interesting. Because they sort of, I mean, lots of people don't even know that Airbnb offers all these experiences, not just if you are staying in an Airbnb, but if you need, like I took a bicycle tour around New York City, which it's a different story. I don't necessarily recommend that, but it was really, there's just a lot of interesting things. And then I think they're calling it icons. And there's a whole new, like really, really high end, interesting stuff. Like I don't necessarily need to stay in the house that was in the movie, Up, but I think it's really cool that you can. So I think they're doing a really, really good job. This is, I mean, I guess this isn't, people don't really think of it as a brand, but I think the New York Times does a great job. I, as a former, print, obsessive and, would get on an airplane with like 16 magazines. And I don't really read magazines anymore. I like the way the New York Times interacts with me, right? Like I'm happy to read it digitally. I'm happy to read the hard copy. I think the newsletters they send are really smart. I think it's such an old brand that feels very, very modern, which I think is really, really hard to do.
I love that. I love their, I play their chronological, put these events in order game, and I'm so good at it. I was like, damn, I should have maybe been in the wrong career. I don't know. Yeah. It's like, so we play all the games at night, like the word games and stuff. I think it's fun. I also like to interact with it in that way because it doesn't feel so serious. You open the app to play a game and you might catch a little news, but you don't have to like only go there for that purpose, which I also think is clever. And the Airbnb experiences, I don't know if you ever did any of like the food related ones, but they have some very cool ones. I mean, when I was there, we were launching these and it was like, go to Italy and, learn to make pasta with an Italian grandma and like all of that. So fun.
The other one, okay, this is, I don't know a whole lot about this brand, but this is sort of going to tie a few things together. One of the founding partners of Kirschenbaum Bond, Bill Oberlander, has an agency called Oberland, and they just did an ad campaign for ELF, the makeup brand, ELF. Have you seen this?
Is it the one with Judge Judy?
No, it's one that is about, I want to get the words right, but I'm pretty sure it's Too Many Dicks. And it's because his agency is all about like doing good for growth, right? Not just, and so it's identifying that I'm not going to get the data exactly right here, but you're going to get the gist of it, which is there are more CEOs named Richard and Dick than there are female CEOs altogether, or something like that.
Oh my God.
And so the brand is bringing this to the forefront to get its attention, to hopefully like bring more diversity to the C-suite.
That's amazing. I mean, and something that I think is a really big, fish to fry. And I think that, everyone wants to talk about like diversity and, well, not everyone, a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but they want to talk about like diversity and belonging and how to be
Right.
inclusive. And then you look at our leadership teams and you think about it from the top down. And I mean, especially, yourself as a woman coming up in a very male dominated industry. I mean, in food and hospitality and wine. I mean, those are very male dominated industries, or they were. And there
Well,
is
and
a bit of a sea
even publishing,
change. Even publishing. Yeah.
Even though there were so many women there,
Yeah.
the people at the top, the people at the top were mostly men. I mean, there were definitely women in the boardroom, but it was definitely a lot more men.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like we can only hope that we continue to see that evolution. I mean, knowing that we only have a couple more minutes together, I'd love to know, are there any books or learnings that have really shaped you in terms of your career, your vantage point, or any favorite, podcasts you've listened to lately that have made you excited that you'd like to share out with our listeners?
So, okay, there's a book that I haven't read yet that now I can't remember the name of it, but I'm going to find it.
Okay.
A woman who was a salesperson at Food and Wine, my good friend Debbie George, her sister started a company called Fast Forward. And I was lucky enough to be in the beta class when this is many, many years ago. She's wildly successful now. But I got to be in the beta class of her Fast Forward training program. And like she does all the sales training now for Facebook globally. And the two things that I took away from that I use all the time are, one is plan the work the plan, which anybody that worked with me at Food and Wine is going to be like, oh my God, here she goes again. But work the plan, plan the work the plan was for everything you were doing, right? For even like the most basic sales call you were going on, like, did you do all the research? Did you think it through? And now you did the work and like take it to the next level, right? So we used it at the Food and Wine Classic in Aspen all the time because everybody was going there for the weekend. And sure, you knew you were going to have great food, great wine. You were going to have fun. It was beautiful there. But what were you doing, right? What clients were you seeing? How were you like moving any business forward? And so we would say, okay, so now before you get there, plan the work. And then when you're there, work that plan, right?
Yeah.
So that was one thing, which I love because I think it's incredibly useful in so many ways. And then the other one is, again, I can't remember exactly how it was articulated, but so this woman's name is Lisa McCarthy, and she has a new book out that I've meant to buy and I haven't read it yet because I think it's going to be great because here I am, like 15 years later talking about things that she taught me, which was you create your goal plan, right? Everyone always talks about, you write down your goals for work, but do you write down your goals for your personal life? So when you do this project with her, it really makes you think about like, where do you want to be in 5 years in your personal life? But the way you write the goals is you write it as if it's a year from now, right? So it's 1 year from now and you want to write what you've accomplished. And it's just a different framework and it's really, really smart and really effective. And so that's what I would say.
I love that. And I think also just knowing that, when you just put I think every person that you've mentioned on this call, not on purpose, has been like a really powerful, amazing woman who's also pushed you or shaped you. So just like, that's really what makes me really happy is to know that like there's other women pushing other women to like keep rising. And like, I think that we have to do that and say each other's names, but like you've just given like a, like a roll call of like some very cool, very prominent women that like folks that are listening should be Googling and listening to and reading. And Lisa's book, Fast Forward, we can also link in the show notes too, which would be really good. How can we kind of follow your work? What are you working on next? Where can people learn more about you, Chris?
I post a lot of what I eat on Instagram.
Love that.
It's just my last name, Grdovic. So within the Food and Wine Classic in Aspen, American Express does a trade program specifically for the restaurant trade. And so my panel is Danny Meyer, Marcus Samuelson, Katie Kindred, and Nikki Russ Fetterman from Russ and Daughters. And the research is so fun. Yesterday, I had breakfast at Russ and Daughters with Nikki Russ Fetterman. So that was really fun just to just talk about how they're growing that brand, but protecting that brand. I have been, a friend of Danny Meyer for so many years, but I'm sort of excited to go back and reread his book, Setting the Table, because, even though it's 15 years ago, 17 years ago, something like that, there's still so much relevance in there.
I carry so many of the things from that book with me. I mean, just that constant gentle pressure mentality is like always what I'm thinking about as a leader.
I'm excited to read it now because obviously I read it back in he was another speaker at one of our food and wine sales meetings, and we were promoting the book at the time. So I'm excited to talk to him now, because even though I've followed his career, I have to actually figure out how to squeeze it all into an hour, because obviously you could talk to him for many, many, many hours. Which actually just made me think of another book. I'm a big fan of Will Guidara's Unreasonable Hospitality, which is
I haven't read that.
Of Danny Meyer, right? Because Will worked for Dan, and then he went and opened 11 Madison Park, and now he has the Welcome Conference. And Unreasonable Hospitality is not just for restaurateurs, but anybody in any service business, and it is just chock full of good advice.
That's amazing. You talked about talking to Danny Myers for hours. I mean, how am I going to talk to you for anything less than 6 hours? I don't know. Unfortunately, we're coming up on time. No, seriously, it's been such a pleasure just to learn more about your trajectory. I mean, one thing I'd love is for you, if you could share one final thought that you want to leave our listeners with today.
Gosh, I mean, I think the final, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess the most, I don't know if I'd say it's the most important thing. So it's a final thought. The final thought is, just to always be learning. And right. I think back on my days at Food and Wine, and I like I said, it was a dream job and it was so great. But it's so different than what it's like to work at a startup now. And I think there were things that I could have learned while I was there that I didn't, because people stayed in their lane. And I think now, not just at startups, I don't think people stay in their lane as much because people don't have as much help as they used to, right? We used to have assistants and there was just more infrastructure. And so it's so important to be able to do so many different things. And so, always be learning.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so awesome just having you on the show, learning more about your story, and it's just been such a treat.
Lauren, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for taking me back down memory lane. I've loved every minute of it.
Oh, thank you. And this has been Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez, and we will talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.